to the next edition of the Weichert Reports video blog. My name is Brandon Weichert, founder and CEO of the Weichert Report. Happy 2017. Here's to a great new year. The drink tonight is a 12-year bottle of Johnny Walker Black, one of the classics. And tonight I'm talking to you a little bit about the ongoing Chinese Nicaraguan Canal. What that is basically, it was proposed in 2012 by the Hong Kong Nicaragua Canal Development Investment Group, and it's founded by Wang Jing. Wang Jing was one of the wealthiest men in China. Made his fortune of about, I believe, 10.1 billion or $10 billion US dollars in telecommunications. The company, he's based out of Hong Kong. The company he founded was granted in 2013 a 50-year concession by the Nicaraguan government, President Daniel Ortega, his government, with an additional 50-year option to develop the land. It is a $50 billion deal. When it was proposed, it was stated, and in fact, until I think June of 2016, the Hong Kong Nicaragua Canal Development Investment Group maintained that by 2019, the 5 years from the actual beginning of the construction on the project, by 2019 they were anticipating the project to be completed. If it were completed, the canal will be 3 times larger and 2 times deeper than the Panama Canal, which opened operations in 1914. This is a major strategic issue right now. Right now, the project, I have been told, and doing research on this, is on hold. That the Hong Kong company, headed by Wang Jing, is essentially heading up a $50 billion boondoggle. And when I say it's a strategic issue, it's because in China, most major corporations that are Chinese are not independent of the government. As I've written at several articles at the AmericanGreatness.com, particularly one entitled The Art of Economic Warfare, which has also subsequently been reposted on the Weichert Report, at least the first 2 paragraphs of it. It will be linked to in the below comments section, or description of the video, this video blog on YouTube. Basically, the Chinese have a very different view on the role of corporations in their country. It's not just a economic money-making pursuit, though that's important. It is a strategic, military, even offensive concept. Corporations are essentially arms in China. It's known as state-owned enterprise. They are essentially arms of the Chinese government sent forth to do business, not only to benefit the people leading those state-owned enterprises, which are normally people affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, but it's also to further the interests and goals of the Chinese Communist Party itself. The goal of this proposed canal is to extend Chinese geopolitical reach into Latin America. Of course, Latin America has generally been considered to be the American sphere of influence. The Monroe Doctrine was created to essentially force non-American powers from having any significant geopolitical role or influence in the New World, North America and South America. It was essentially, it has long been assumed that Central and South America are essentially America's backyard. But despite this, the United States has been irresponsibly preoccupied with intervening in other parts of the world farther removed, and we have allowed our relations with Latin America, as complex as they were, to go untouched and to sour beyond where they were. This has allowed for forces like the Chinese, through their state-owned enterprises, to move in and try to essentially push out American interests. China is currently bankrolling and backing the collapsing Venezuelan regime, for instance. They are currently conducting oil drilling operations around Cuba. They continue to have positive relations with the Castro Cuban government. They are seeking to intensify their role in Latin America, not just because of economics. Latin America has a very youthful, vibrant population with a lot of natural resources, but they're also seeking to do harm to America's traditional geopolitical interests. The creation of this Nicaraguan canal, while many experts, and as we've seen in the last year with the horrific analyses of not just the U.S. election, but Brexit and what I believe is going on in Germany and France with the rise of the far right-wing parties. As we've seen, the so-called experts in the media are generally wrong, or they don't get the whole picture. And so the Chinese are developing this canal for a few reasons. The first is to harm America's geopolitical interests. So right now, the United States, we built the Panama Canal in 1914. The Panama Canal connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans rather than having ships go around South America or go over around Africa and up into Asia and back. We've basically created a shortcut that allows for ships going between the Pacific and the Atlantic to cut through the very small isthmus of Panama, the Panama Canal, and it basically reduces travel time. It's very convenient. Of course, in the late 1970s, I believe the Carter administration, if memory serves, ceded management over that canal back to the Panamanians, who in turn actually allowed a Chinese firm to come in, and which of course is a state-owned enterprise, to come in and essentially manage the canal zone. So strategic liability was right there. But the creation of this Nicaraguan canal, if it were to go through, would offset any advantage America has vis-a-vis the Panama Canal. It would also seriously, potentially give China an undue amount of geopolitical influence in Latin America. Basically, they've basically bought out the Ortega government. The Nicaraguan people are torn about whether they should support or oppose this canal, but the government there is not, because they're getting paid off big time. Plus, the Ortega government is not exactly the most pro-American government, so any chance to make it look like America's doing bad is a win for Mr. Ortega and the Nicaraguan government. The environmental impacts of this canal are extreme. A lot of damage is going to be done if this canal is built. You see, Nicaragua is the second, I believe, poorest country in Latin America. It also has one of the largest populations. This is a very bad mix. In order for the canal to be built, it's going to have to it's going to have to connect up from the Pacific side to the Atlantic side. It's going to have to cut through I can't say the name in Spanish, but it's basically, it's Lake Nicaragua. It's the largest lake in the region. It supplies much of the fresh water and much of the fish and the food for many people in Nicaragua. Should should this canal be built, in order for it to accommodate the large shipping vessels that China wants to send through there, they're going to have to dig deeper and go through the Lake Nicaragua, which is actually shallower than what the canal needs to be. So they're going to have to uproot the sediment in the Lake Nicaragua and make it deeper. And there are environmental concerns as to what that will do to water quality, as to how that's going to impact the people who depend on that water source, and also on the overall environmental impact. As we see in modern China today, smog-ridden Beijing, the Chinese care very little for environmental impact. They just don't view it that way. They care more about development. So the question now, by the way, this would be the largest construction project in the world if it actually goes through. And when I say go through, I mean the money has been allocated. The company has been spending money apparently on the project, and yet they've not broken any ground. Wang Jing, the kind of progenitor, at least the public face of the project, he lost almost all of his fortune. Well, he lost his $10 billion is now $1.1 billion. And he lost most of his fortune in the recent Chinese stock market shockwaves. And there's some question as to whether or not he's going to be able to support the project. He claims that the money that is being put into the project is from private sources, as well as a lot of it is coming out of, he's financing it himself, and with the loss of his wealth, that's going to be infringed upon. He's not said that's going to be infringed upon. In fact, he insists that the project's going forward as planned. But analysts say that by him losing that kind of money, the endeavor is being seriously damaged. There's also some question as to overall feasibility. Even though Kinsey, the consulting firm, has validated that this is actually a legitimate and viable project in terms of whether they can complete the project, it's actually doable. The environmental impacts are also, or potential environmental impacts, are causing the Nicaraguan people to divide over the issue of whether to support the Nicaraguan Canal. They all recognize the potential economic benefits, but they also are concerned that, hey, we might actually lose, we're already poor, we might actually lose our only source of fresh water and sustenance with any damage to the lake. There are also some things that the Nicaraguans need to consider, and that is how the Chinese do business. And all you need to do is look over to the continent next door in Africa and see that where the Chinese go and do business, yes, they build roads, yes, they develop things. No, they very often do not employ the local population. China is drowning in human beings right now. They have an abundance of people, and there is no way that that government can provide the kind of modern lifestyle that the people are seeking in China itself. So China has been for many years now encouraging many of their citizenry to go live abroad in these new countries that they're opening business deals with in Africa. This basically is having the effect of what The Economist in 2008 called the new colonialists. The Africans welcomed the Chinese as an alternative to Western aid, and as a means of distancing themselves from their former colonial occupiers in the West. And the assumption was that the Chinese were going to do trade, not aid, and that in doing trade, the Chinese would basically come in and hire most indigenous people, thereby building up the economies in that area and the capacity of those indigenous people for self-governance. This was not the case. They are sending Chinese workers to work for Chinese firms in Africa. and they are effectively colonizing. Uh, the same thing will happen in Nicaragua. I know that the government there is probably negotiating, but the fact is they've already made the concession to the land. 50-year concession with an additional 50-year concession on top of that until the program is complete. The project is complete. The fact that Wang Jing has lost most of his wealth and the fact that he claims there are private entities funding this endeavor is meaningless. As we've seen with Chinese state-owned enterprises, they do what they can to cover up the fact that they are nothing more than proxies for the Chinese Communist Party. There have been a litany of examples of Chinese state-owned enterprises existing in the red, not just communist, but not ideologically, but actually in terms of not making any money, existing in the red as opposed to being successful in the black. They've been existing in the red for a long time, and yet somehow these companies are able to go on. Well, why is that? That's because the Chinese Communist Party, the government, subsidizes their operations because the government believes that they are a strategic advantage. So as long as those companies continue to move forward, continue to operate, they are performing a vital function of Chinese state policy. And so the fiduciary responsibility to make money for a corporation is subordinated to a national security or national interest consideration on the part of the Chinese government. And so this is to a point that a Facebook friend of mine, Christopher Wiley, made. He had actually was the inspiration for this video blog. It had been some years since I had analyzed the Nicaraguan Canal, originally in 2012 when the news was released. On the canal, I was mortified for America's geostrategic place. I was told at the time the project was never going to go anywhere. I did not believe them. The Chinese, when the government of China puts its mind behind a project and its money, they normally tend to make something happen. Just look at the Three Gorges Dam. Just because this will have been the largest construction project in the world, just because there's going to be a hell of a lot of negative impacts from the environment as well as diplomatic and, well, not diplomatic, but political fallout from the local population, is not something the Chinese government particularly cares about. They care about the bottom line, but more importantly, they care about the geostrategic advantage that such a canal will give them, as well as the prestige of having a canal to rival America's Panama Canal. And it signals to the region of Latin America that the new player on the block is not America, it's China. And you better start making more sweetheart deals with China over America to do harm to American national interest. So none of these factors are going to cow China for too long. I do think the project is on hold, and this is to the question that Mr. Wiley had initially posited. He was asking whether or not the project, what we know, is the project going forward or not. So, technically speaking, the project is likely on hold, though if you were to ask the representatives of the Hong Kong Nicaragua Canal Development Investment Group, they would say, no, everything's still going. But the fact is, they were supposed to have broken ground by 2016. They have not yet done that, so this is going to slow their entire timetable of 5 years. However, given the ongoing tension between the U.S. and the Chinese, given the geostrategic importance of such a project, I would not rest on my laurels that, and say, well, the Chinese are done. They've already invested $50 billion. That's a sunk cost. And they're not governed by the usual fiduciary calculations that most American corporations are governed by. The Chinese government is looking right now for levers to pull on to keep America off balance in the day, as Donald Trump is closer to becoming president. as I've noted in other video blogs and other essays, um, this is going to end up being a very tense time between the US and China, more tense than it has ever been in the last 40 or 50 years. I would expect the Chinese to look for ways of complicating American policy. One such way is the creation of the Nicaraguan Canal. Now, it might take longer than they say, and they might not get started anytime soon. But the fact is, the notion that this thing will never get built, um, just because Washington experts are willing it not to be built, is absurd. The Ortega government is, although suffering through a lot of political fallout from this decision at home, they're still pushing ahead with it. They have made the concessions already. They are not seeking to remove China from this endeavor. Indeed, I doubt that they could. And so I really think that this Nicaragua Canal deal is going to go ahead. I think that in our lifetimes, we will likely see in the next 5 to 10 years the attempt, at least, to complete the project. Now, whether or not it will is really up to the economic situation in China. But this canal is not going away. And so for those of you out there saying that we don't have to worry about this, it's done, these are the same people who told me 4 years ago that they'd never even get funding for it. And they did, the Hong Kong Nicaragua Canal Development Investment Group. If the Chinese Politburo thinks that there's something to be gained from this endeavor, they will continue it. And let us not forget that much of the money so far has actually been spent. It's just been spent on things like hiring, office personnel in Nicaragua, and so we'll see whether or not it does translate. I don't feel comfortable writing it off, though. I don't. If the Chinese view it's in their national interest, they will move accordingly. That's just the way it is. So keep an eye out on that. The Chinese are really trying to gain a foothold in Latin America in order to complicate the U.S. geostrategic position. I don't know how effective they'll be, but the fact that they're trying tells me that we need to be paying very close attention. Just because it's going to be the largest construction project, and just because there's all these environmental concerns, and just because, all the hand wringing, if the Chinese want to do it, they're going to do it. And that has been the key example of Chinese development for the last 30 years, regardless of ramification and regardless of any potential blowback. They don't care. If they view that they can make money and make strategic gains while they're doing it, then they're going to do it. They're going to push for that. And so it's really going to be interesting to see what happens over these next few years. And so I hope for Christopher Wiley, I hope that gives you some information as to what's going on. I would be very skeptical about those who say it's never going to happen. I would take the Zen Master approach. We'll see. But I do think that if people are going off of usual cost-benefit analyses to say that it's not going to happen, they are completely off, because a state-owned enterprise, especially in China, it does not have to follow those conventional rules. They will always be subsidized by the Chinese government until the Chinese government determines that there is no longer any strategic value there. And let me assure you, a Chinese-controlled canal in South America linking the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean is a big deal for them. And it is something that they're going to want to do, if at all possible. Which, by the way, it is technically feasible. So, for the Weichert Report, this is going to be a great year in 2017. Thank you for your time. Cheers, and I will see you soon. This has been your world. Thank you.